Next Gen
We are
fam, what's going
live.
on, everybody? We're live.
Happy Thursday morning. Whether you're East Coast or West Coast, we got an AM for you. We have a true special one. Jay, how you feeling, man?
So we do a lot of interviews. Everybody knows we have our Mentor Momentum show, incredible C-suite executives. We have our Momentum audio show. We're bringing in like world-changing entrepreneurs from every field. But the buzz about Marc's interview was really unlike any other. I think it's because, so obviously we'll get into the book. We'll get into a lot of his past. But Marc is one of those serial entrepreneurs who actually now communicates about like the stuff that wasn't so pretty that happened. Whereas everybody else, I think, is now, I don't say soaking it all in, but Marc's like, no. Now that it's great, let me tell you about really what went down. So I know people are super excited to have him here. Shout out to so many who are joining us. Gulam and Geet. Shout out to you, gents, coming in on the evening. Shout out to the Next Gen fam. Everybody tuning in. Grandma Rose.
Noel
Shout out to
in
you
India.
for joining in.
Unbelievable. We have an international guest for this. I must say, going off Justin's point, Marc kind of made us LinkedIn famous through our post, Jay. We threw up a graphic for the interview. We had so much traffic. I'm fired up. Reading his book was just the beginning. If you've caught an interview, if you've heard anything about his story, we're going to dive into the goods in just a second. We are honored to have him here.
And with that, y'all, we want to give a special thanks to our friends, McGuire and the whole team at Zendesk. They are the sponsor for this episode and our partner. And they're giving next-gen entrepreneurs free for 6 months. Their Zendesk for Startups program, help you organize, level up your customer service. Dylan and I are horrible at customer service. And now using Zendesk ourselves, a proud partner, proud customer. It's been great. Also, a huge thank you and shout out to Mariah on Marc's team for making this all happen. She's been incredible to work with. Shout out to Jenna behind the scenes, bringing it all together. We're pumped for this episode. With that, DG, should we rock and roll and get started on all this all?
We have quite the show. Let's bring our guest on, Marc Randolph. Can we get you on the stage?
Good morning, guys, or good afternoon, wherever you happen to be.
Marc, good morning. We are so fired up to have you here. We had number one question coming in that I got to start with, and we'll get back to the original story in a second. But Marc, I heard a rumor that you are the number one fan of dog food to the point where you almost named the company Kibble. Can you give us the explanation? What's behind the scenes there?
Well, it's hard to make that a really quick story, but yes, the original name for Netflix was Kibble. And it's because, when you start a company, before you actually have your real name, you still have things you have to do. You've got to get a website, you've got to pay people, you need to get a lease. So you need a name. And rather than go through the hassle of picking your final name, you use a beta name, which is what is going to be the fake name, really. And the advice I got from somebody was, you want to pick a beta name which is so bad that when you run into the inevitable challenges of picking your real name, you won't be tempted to use the beta name. And so Kibble it was. But there was reasoning behind it. There's an old marketing expression that says, it doesn't make a difference how good your advertising is if the dogs won't eat the dog food. That fundamentally, marketing, all that stuff doesn't make a difference. It's the product that really counts. And I wanted to kind of keep us all focused front and center on that. And so, in fact, I still have Kibble.com. If you go to Kibble.com, you'll end up at my website. If you send an email to mark@Kibble.com, it'll eventually wind its way to me. So it kind of stays there as a little reminder.
Next Gen fam, if you're in the product world, you're in the strategy world, the beta name, definitely something to keep in mind. Marc, I want to start going back to early on in your career. In a lot of your interviews, you've talked about that when you were getting started, the term entrepreneur wasn't as common as it is today. Now, Dylan and I, even the last 7 years building Next Gen, we've seen it ourselves. Now it's so sexy, cool. Everybody wants to be an entrepreneur. 7 years ago, it wasn't the case. And going back at the very beginning, it definitely wasn't the case. So when you were getting started, what did it mean to you, this entrepreneurial thing, this lifestyle? And what were some of the early signs in your life or career that really told you maybe you were part of that crazy circle that was maybe needed a beta name at the time?
Well, the funny thing is that actually you use the word entrepreneurial and lifestyle in the same sentence, because that really says everything. Listen, you're talking about, back in the day, back 7 years ago. I'm talking 40 years ago. And back then, I won't say there weren't entrepreneurs, because of course there were, but certainly no one talked about it. And it was not something anyone would aspire to. That was almost the euphemism for someone who was unable to hold a real job. But what happened is the people who ended up doing that, who ended up trying to start their own companies, they weren't doing it for the lifestyle. They weren't doing it because of the money. They weren't doing it certainly because they wanted to have any measure of fame. They were just doing it because they really enjoyed solving problems. Or in my case, they were almost compelled to do it. that you saw an opening or a hole and you had to fill it. And, I think it's in some ways there's pros and cons to the fact that becoming an entrepreneur has become so glorified, that there's movies about it and TV shows, and people can take college majors in entrepreneurship. And of course, the positive is, I think for some people, it's a fantastic career. I mean, for me, I've loved every second of it. And I'm always trying to convince people that this is something you're passionate about. Well, go for it. And the fact that it's now become something well-known, that helps. The negative is that everyone does it for the too many people do it for the wrong reasons. And they're doing it because they have this very, very false idea about what it means to be an entrepreneur. And the analogy is that people back in my generation and still have these dreams of being an actor or an actress, but their reasoning all too frequently is because, I want to be rich and famous. But I hate to break it to you, the odds are infinitesimal that you will be rich and famous as an actor or an actress. Whereas if you came and said, no, God, I just love creating characters and I love making people feel things in the audience, well, then you're doing it for the right reason. But then you could do that perfectly well in community theater. You can do it in your hometown. You don't need to move to Hollywood and be a waiter or a waitress. And the same thing with entrepreneurship. If you're in it for the money and you're in it for the fame, you're going to be disappointed. It's extremely unlikely to happen. And the things you're going to have to do every single day are going to drive you crazy if you're not passionate about them. But if you're in this because you like solving problems fundamentally, if you like doing things that haven't been done before, you've come to the right place.
Amen to that. Next Gen fam, you heard it here. What are your motives? What is that core value, that foundational drive? And really be honest with yourself, as Marc's telling you. Marc, I want to pull from the book a moment that I believe you're looking out from the Netflix office to the parking lot and you see the cars of everybody who has their payments that really come from their salary you're providing them. That's when you felt like an entrepreneur and part of that journey. I want to ask you, going back even before then though, you had advice from dad saying, you got to build a business to really find wealth in this life. So many maybe candy arbitrage stories in there too. What was that first real moment for you when you said, okay, this entrepreneurship thing, I'm called to this. I feel this is my passion.
That's a good question. I don't know that it was necessarily a single moment, because it's an accumulation of little micro encouragements, and one of the earliest jobs I had, which wasn't even in the book, but when I was probably 7 or 8, I was selling seeds door to door, garden seeds, like for vegetables and flowers. But basically it meant going up, knocking on doors, and trying to sell something. And a lot of people who do that and get the door slammed in their face go, this is not for me. And back they go and sit on the couch and watch television. And some people take that as a challenge. Like, I'm going to figure out how to not get the door slammed in my face. And once I can get the door to stay open, how do I make the sale? And once I can make the sale for 1, how can I make the sale for 3? And those are the little things that an entrepreneur does. And I found that for some crazy reason intriguing. But probably if there was a singular moment, it was, I had this job. I guess now it's kind of this glorified, it's called chief of staff. But in fact, for me, it was more of being a gopher. I basically was following the CEO of this company around with a notepad, writing down all the things that he'd committed to other people and they'd committed to him. But it was in a music publishing company, which had all these divisions. And one day I was introduced to the mail order division, which was, calling it a division was a little bit of an overstatement. But basically it was the direct to consumer arm of this music publishing company. And for some crazy reason, I thought that was the most exciting, interesting thing and said, I want that job. And that gave me my first chance to begin building a business within inside the confines of a larger company, that I could experiment, and the things that I didn't understand, I could figure out. And I could begin that process of saying, what does it take to make something successful? And that probably was where I realized, wow, not only do I like this, I think I'm actually reasonably good at it. And I want more.
And a lot of foreshadowing, obviously, coming out of a lot of those experiences. Marc, something that's really interesting to Dylan and I about getting the opportunity to investigate your career, your successes, many things that have happened in the book, is that you've done and have been able to repeat, I think, a model in many different industries, very different. Not necessarily you have deep expertise in one industry, but you've been able to maybe have a framework or a playbook. And one of the key themes that have emerged is you're so aggressively customer first. So maybe we can use as a jumping point this "don't put the milk in the back of the store" analogy that I know really resonated with Dylan and I, and then maybe can use that as a jumping point to talking about Netflix, customer first, and what was that customer innovation that y'all were really focused on.
So, I mean, you've touched on a bunch of interesting things there. The whole thing about not putting the milk in the back of the store is that companies get too caught up in their business model and they forget about who they're really trying to serve. And the analogy I'm referring to with the milk in the back of the store is the fact that you could take me, take anybody, blindfold them, put them in the airplane, bring them to a foreign city in front of a grocery store I've never been to before and say, find the milk. And like some homing pigeon, right you go back to that far distant corner of the store where the milk is stocked. A route that incidentally takes you past the chips and past the beer and past the snacks. And you go, every single store in the world does this. And is this because we all as humans, oh no, we like having to go out of our way and throw all kinds of extra shit in our cart just to get to the milk? No, it's because it suits the store. And that personifies what's wrong with so many businesses. That if you realize customers are coming in for milk, for God's sake, put the milk in the front. And you're right, I'm extremely customer centric, and I've done it across many, many different businesses. And one of my tricks, just to give you an example here, is I'll come into these new categories and know nothing about them and want to really quickly understand them. And I don't do that by reading about them or interviewing experts. I talk to the consumers. And most companies have a customer service function. And back in the day, largely phone. Now it's chat a lot. But I literally would spend, a day, 2 days a quarter, 2 days a month rather, in the customer service center just taking phone calls. I would be the customer service agent. And wow, the patterns you pick up, you understand who the people are, what they want, what's bothering them. And then you just have to train yourself, stay focused on that. Early at Netflix, back in the day when it was a DVD by mail business, where we actually mailed DVDs out in little red envelopes, I used to go into our warehouse, and every time there was a new employee, but every so often I get these refresher talks, and I would go into the stack and I'd pull out one envelope, and I go, listen, you guys are seeing tens of thousands of these roll through here. The temptation is to think of it as this just faceless stream, but this person, Dylan Gambardella, he is waiting for his copy of Teenage Cheerleaders in Heat. And he will be so disappointed if, for example, the next morning it doesn't show up. And you impress upon that there's a real person behind that disc and that the things they do and don't do have true implications. And by the way, I did not, there's privacy here. I do not snoop on Dylan's actual watching habits back then. So don't infer anything from that, perhaps a little bit politically incorrect comment.
Marc, we appreciate you. And I think for anybody out there who's listening, spend the time with the customer. That is in many ways a source of innovation, feedback, ideation even. It can be a partner in that journey. And what Marc's telling us, the most encouraging part of it is, he doesn't say go buy the $1 million software. Get on the phone, get in the chat, get in the email inbox. Marc, I love this. And I want to bring that right to Netflix. And whether my preference is on Netflix, them or not, we'll go watch a movie tomorrow night perhaps. But early days, and you had this idea. The first thing you did was go to the post office and drop a CD in and see if it actually worked, if you can mail this thing. And it works. And you keep going, you're going and going from there. About 9 months before launch. And shout out April 14th, only yesterday you celebrated your launch anniversary. Talk to us about in those 9 months, what the ideation process was like for you, where the customer sat, and how you and that early team really were able to go from this concept to actually getting a website up and pressing go on play.
Yeah, well, the thing we talked, it was great leading. Just a moment ago, we were talking about how I'd enter these categories I know nothing about. And certainly deciding to do a video business was just one more case of me jumping into something blind, because it's not like I was a movie buff that, I was not the person you came to and you wanted to know who the best French directors were, or who should win this year's Oscar for cinematography or anything like that. I was, I watched Lion King over and over and over again because I had like kids who were 3 kids under 10. But that ideation thing was basically this realization that fundamentally, this was not necessarily about being a movie business. This was fundamentally about delivering a service and doing a phenomenal job of meeting expectations. And that came down to realizing, what does that take? And we were lucky that we were competing against Blockbuster, which at the time was this huge behemoth of a video rental giant, 9,000 stores. And we were fortunate in that people, well, there's no other way to say it, people hated Blockbuster. They hated that experience. And part of our genesis was realizing there had to be a better way. Not that we knew what it was, but that there was room for innovation here, because the existing experience on one hand was doing $8 billion a year. So there was something there. But on the other hand, everyone who did it was saying how much they disliked it. And that's a great combination for finding a business. And we did lots of things. Obviously, we did lots of focus group stuff. I actually went to the video trade shows to try and soak in what this whole business was. I did manage to recruit someone who actually knew what they were doing, a gentleman named Mitch Lowe, who went on to found Redbox and a bunch of other big companies, but who was my jungle guide, so to speak, to keep me from falling in the same traps that previous people had fallen into, perhaps. But it was this long process of going through 9 months of saying, what does it take? And then once we decided, beginning to build that out, but with the realization that the real learning would only begin on April 15th.
Marc, everybody now in the entrepreneurship world, as entrepreneurship is so sexy, everybody wants to be one. They also tag along this innovation buzzword. Everybody wants to be so innovative. Companies want to be so innovative. But I feel that so many times when I'm talking to people, they don't realize the flip side of innovation is change. And so many in our audience that wanted to get involved in this interview, many are joining us live and are going to listen to later, they want to know, okay, very successful in hindsight, the digital revolution that Netflix has made, even so many micro decisions. You were straddling selling and renting DVDs, then you went just to renting, and then obviously the whole digital transformation. Can you take us to the team and the team's mindset at those times when you're making those innovative decisions? Obviously, there's data pulling you maybe in every direction, but you have strategies that you want to implement. How did you navigate the team culture, team environment of innovating in such a meaningful way, shifting so much of your revenue focus, eventually making it out and becoming a right decision? But I'm sure at the time, not everybody's with you, maybe hands in the air saying, all right, we're on board. This makes sense. Let's dump all our revenue and go all in on the future.
Well, listen, innovation, in my opinion, is cultural. It really essentially comes down to the mindset of the people and how comfortable they are with, as you said, doing things differently. And so one of the key things that you do at the very beginning when you're building your team is you're recruiting for that. You're recruiting this for someone's tolerance for adversity, someone's comfort with doing a different thing each day when they come in, someone being totally not just fine with a huge pivot, but actually excited about it. The worst kind of person is someone who goes, okay, finally, now we've got a nice predictable rhythm. And then when the rhythm changes, they get upset or they fight it. And this is kind of a very telling thing about me, which I only kind of realized in mindset. I worked for a period of time for a fairly big software company, more than 1,000 employee software company. And as big companies do, they would do these reorganizations. And it was so binary. I'd say 95% of the people would freak out. And I would get excited. I loved reorgs because I just tossed everything up in the air, and it was a whole new way of thinking and different reporting relationships. And I, of course, after a while, I realized I cannot be like going around grinning during these things because people are freaking out. But inside, I was going, oh, this is the best. And that's what you're looking for. You're looking for building that sort of team. And one of the advantages of doing Netflix when I was reasonably old, Netflix was number 6 startup. and I was 38, I guess, that I had had plenty of chance to find people that who had that mindset, who were really smart driven generalists, not in a very narrow groove specialists. And there's absolutely a place for specialists, don't get me wrong. It's just not necessarily at the beginning when you haven't the slightest idea what your business is going to be. Like you said, we changed from being, we were renting and selling, and then all of a sudden in one day we're not selling anymore, and then all of a sudden we're not just doing a la carte business, we're all of a sudden doing subscriptions, and then all of a sudden we're also doing streaming. And if you're not comfortable with your job changing every day, you're probably in the wrong business.
Mark, Justin, and I are grinning because we resonate so strongly with everything you're saying here. I'd love for any of our corporate entrepreneurs, perhaps, get in the comments. Let us know how you feel about that reorg word that tends to be, as Mark put it, very polarizing. But I want to stay in that first year, Mark, because you have a really cool meeting, right? Toward the end of that beginning foundation. You fly out, I guess not the other side of the country, other side from where we are in New York, but up a little bit to visit the Amazon headquarters. And you get to sit down with Jeff Bezos. You have a great conversation. You're talking about business models and really hitting it off. But I think my number one takeaway from the way you think back in hindsight is that this was a moment when you turned down the deal that you actually didn't turn down the deal. What you did was recommit to Netflix. And while everything's going on, you talk about that first year, your utility players figuring it out. Do we do this, that? Give us the mindset that you were in when you had this opportunity. Of course, maybe the deal did not manifest exactly in the final offer sheet, but you and your partners said, we're going all in on Netflix because we believe in this. What were you thinking about? What was that decision matrix like? Give us some insight there.
Yeah, my book, as you referred to, is called That Will Never Work. And my podcast is called That Will Never Work. And there's a reason why they're all called That Will Never Work. It's because that is what I heard 10,000 times over my career as an entrepreneur. And I specifically heard it about Netflix. I heard it from investors. I heard it from potential employees. I heard it, from partners. I heard it from my wife. Everybody goes, that'll never work. And lo and behold, not more than 3 or 4 months after we launched, we get the phone call from Amazon that Jeff Bezos would love to meet with us. And it was pretty obvious that that was going to be about possibly acquiring the company. And that's the framework you've got to understand, is that Jeff Bezos at the time, Amazon, they were the pioneer. They were the shining star in the e-commerce sky. They had gone public already. They had demonstrated that you actually could sell things effectively on the internet. I mean, he was the man. And they were just selling books back then. And so to have this business, which everyone had been saying that'll never work, then all of a sudden Jeff Bezos is going, I might see some value in this. What a tremendously gratifying moment to go, oh my gosh, this is incredible. And as you mentioned, we flew up to Dallas and we sat down with Jeff and we shared some yucks, and and on the way out, they kind of intimated, yes, that they might be interested in buying us to jumpstart their entry into video. And it would have probably been, they wasn't get down to exact numbers, but somewhere in that 14, 15, $16 million range, which I know I can't tell that sounds big or small. It depends on your perspective here. But believe me, for someone who had been working on this business for less than a year and owned 40% of the company, that was a pretty
Not
big
bad.
number. But we had spent at that point, I'd been working on this for a year and a half. I had solved so many problems. I'd figured out how to build an e-commerce website. I'd hired all these people. I'd managed to convince people to invest in us. I'd convinced all the consumer electronics companies to put coupons in all the DVD player boxes. We had launched. We were selling DVDs. We were renting DVDs. And I kind of mistakenly perhaps thought, oh, we've gotten past all the hard stuff. And as you mentioned, my partner, Reed Hastings, and I, the current CEO, on the flight home, kind of looked at each other and said, we're not ready to walk away yet. We think we're kind of just getting started. And like you said, it was not really a sales thing. It was more of a commitment ceremony. We were now going to be all in.
You're effectively buying your own stock at that price and saying, we know this is going to be so much higher. There's more for us to get out there. I want to unpack one other story that comes a little bit later in the book, but I highly encourage everybody. Dylan and I had a blast reading this book. We had a little bit of book club. Shout out Rich Keller, Gideon, the folks who were with us reading this book together. It was incredible. And a little bit later, we talk about it's, I think, 2000. And then you have the meeting with Blockbuster, and then truly the David and Goliath story. So Amazon, there's interest right around the same time period, obviously high level. There's something going on. Blockbuster, who you dreamed of, taking down. You seem to be very polite when you talk about Blockbuster and the experience, even though you're innovating against them. So high level, just for our audience, I highly encourage everybody to read the book and get the full picture of what goes down. But you enter this meeting with Blockbuster, and you basically get laughed at a little bit when you really found, here's what we value the company at, and here's where we want to go. So unpack a little bit of that story for us, and what ended up happening.
The unpacking is this. We just came off the story about how everyone said this business will never work, and here's the real punchline: is well, they were right. It was a terrible idea. It didn't work. Video rental by mail in an a la carte manner, it didn't work, and so we spent a year and a half trying to find something that would unlock how to do video rental by mail. And there's a lesson right there, is that Netflix did not spring forth fully formed in this big successful Netflix and chill behemoth. That there was a year and a half where it did not work, and we kept trying new things. And finally, there was a breakthrough, and we came up with this ridiculous new model for doing video rental by mail, which had no due dates. It had no late fees. You made a list of movies you wanted to see, and they got mailed to you automatically. It was subscription. I mean, people who have never even remember that Netflix did DVDs are going, what? And that's the point, because that's why we said, I took all my direct marketing background and said, we're going to do a first month free. And I had a fight read on that one, but we're doing a first month free. So here's the problem, that when you do subscription businesses, especially when you do a first month free, the good news is once someone subscribes, they begin paying you a little bit for hopefully years. The bad news is all of your acquisition cost is up front. So you go deep in the hole, and little by little, your subscribers dig you out. And when you have a hit on your hands, because all of a sudden this no due dates, no late fees subscription was crazy popular, all of a sudden orders are flooding in and money is flooding out. And it's not a problem when it's the spring, early spring of the year 2000, and it's the peak of the dot-com mania. And money is like, you can just run out in the highway and flag down a money truck, and they back up and pour all the money in your driveway, and you pitchfork it in your window. But then 2 or 3 months later, all of a sudden when the dot-com palm bubble bursts, not so easy anymore. And so all of a sudden we're going bankrupt being successful. That's the framework. And so we go, okay, we're in deep shit. We're not going to get out of this. What do we do? I think it might be time to partner up, or as they say, seek strategic alternatives. And so we decided to sell ourselves to Blockbuster. And we knew it would be a compelling pairing, because were very scared that they would come up with on their own the very thing we were going to propose, which was a blended model, where you could either subscribe and you could pick them up in the store, or you get a mail deal, or you could return them in the store or return them by mail. And so we pitched that to Blockbuster in the 27th floor of their football field size conference room. And like you said, they laughed at us. And I don't think they laughed at us because the idea was so bad. They laughed at us because of the hubris that we would ask for $50 million, which was the sum total of our investment raised to that date. And we thought it was a nice, neat way to wrap this up, to return all the equity to shareholders, and off we go. And Blockbuster didn't quite see it that way. And they saw us to the door instead. And it was there was a lot of dark moments at Netflix. One of them I mentioned earlier on was standing there looking out at the parking lot going, crap, everyone's job here is depending on me getting this right. And another one was sitting there in the plane flying home from Dallas going, not only is Blockbuster not going to save us, now they're going to compete with us. And I know that there's no easy way out here, that the only way out is to turn and face this head on. And it was a really great moment of clarity and discipline and focus.
I love that. And so many for our younger audience, the next geners, we've got in the comments here. Oh, I remember when that DVD thing happened, right? I love that. And this is maybe the first time you're hearing about it. But Marc, one of your core principles is you can't wait for it to happen because then it'll never happen. Right? You have to make it happen. You have to just get started. So talk to us. You come out of this meeting, you get laughed at effectively. You know that your number one competitor is now going to be competing against you, becoming truly your digital competitor as well. What does the next few steps look like? What is the strategy looking that sets you on the path toward a $250 billion market cap in a few years? But we'll stay back in the early 2000s for now.
It's lots of steps, but the first one is this realization that you can't live on free money or cheap money. That if we're going to make this, we're going to have to make it under our own steam, that we're going to have to take the resources we do have and use those to get us to a point where we're self-sustaining. It really changes this discipline. And it's really hard to tell these stories for people who didn't live through that era of, they used to call it the era of irrational exuberance, where you didn't need to have any business fundamentals, that if you build it, they will come and you will monetize it later and all kinds of ridiculous things. And I think if we had managed to go public back then, we would not be around today because we would not have found the discipline that it required to actually find a business model which made you more money than it cost to provide it. And having that external discipline was what did that, including doing things which were very painful. We had to lay off at one point almost 40% of the company. And that's a brutal thing to do, especially since, as I explained a little bit earlier in our conversation, that these were all people that I'd worked with very closely before and that had been totally on board and totally emotionally invested in the company, and having to sit someone down and explain to them they're not coming with you on this next phase of the journey. It's horrendous, but it's an accumulation of these things, and just recognizing that fundamentally building any kind of company comes down to the same things. It comes down to focus. It comes down to recognizing you can't do everything. It comes down to staying connected to the customer, having a reasonable vision, but not getting distracted by it. I mean, all the things that I learned over the preceding 25 years as an entrepreneur, and you just go back to the basics and say, we'll get through this.
Marc, as we're in the fourth quarter of our interview, I want to extract for our audience some of the learnings that you took everywhere, not only at Netflix, but so many. So you've co-founded half a dozen other successful startups. You're part of the Looker Data Science's incredible story that sold to Google. You're on multiple boards. And something that is part of your philosophy is that a lot of younger entrepreneurs that you work with, they don't necessarily need an advisor. What they need is more of a mentor. And that's a role that you play to a handful of small, groups, 2 or 3 maybe founders at a time. And you have a lot of rules around this. You talk about you can have my money or my time, but not both. You have a structure and approach. So help our audience unpack. So many in the Next Gen fam, they say mentorship. We say it's the secret sauce. They are looking for mentors, but they don't really know. Are they looking for one mentor, 20 advisors? So what's your philosophy on mentorship? How has it been informed, and how do you execute it?
Well, first of all, I got to dispel the myth. It's not like I come into this whole thing with all kinds of rules.
Here's the rule book.
Sign here.
Yeah, no, it's more that especially now, I just have way more people who I could work with that would be so interesting to work with that I have time for, and so I just have some internal things that I'm looking at to say how do I use my time wisely. But more back to the point is that at its heart, being a founder is a lonely profession. Because a lot of times there's just not anybody you can talk to about things. Some of the decisions you have to make, you can't really share with your employees. I mean, you should be as transparent as possible, but some things, it's on you to make that decision. And sometimes you can't share that with your board or with your investors. And you can certainly share it with peers who are at other companies, but they don't understand the problem well enough. And I kind of realized, and I believe firmly that there's a role for every founder having someone who can play that role. A person who not only has the knowledge of the company, but enough to give good decisions, but is impartial. In other words, being an investor makes you partial. If you're an investor, you have preferred stock, whereas the founder has common stock. And so when the founder is asking a question about how should I structure this, should I accept this offer, and the advisor and the founder have different outcomes, that's a hard one. And so it really is great to have someone who's totally aligned with you, who's totally impartial. But the key part is you don't just want shoot from the hip pattern recognition. And I can do that with the best of them. And you've heard some of these little quick things I've delivered today. And they are useful and helpful. But fundamentally, some of the problems require someone really understanding. If you came and said to me in 1 second, I'm having problems with my co-founder, I could go, oh, you just need to sit down and work it out. And you're going, oh, God, that was the most useless piece of advice ever, even though it's true. But what you want and what a good mentor could provide is saying, yeah, I know that Sharon is difficult, but she's an engineer. It's a different way of thinking. And I also know that she's this, and I know you are this. And you know both sides of it well enough that you can provide advice which is fundamentally true, fundamentally helpful, and fundamentally insightful. That's the value of having a mentor, rather than just having. Don't even get me started on the uselessness of an advisory board. But fundamentally, having someone in your corner who really knows it is a hugely powerful and valuable thing. And the interesting kind of on the podcast, on the That Will Never Work podcast, I am not interviewing celebrity entrepreneurs. I'm just mentoring early stage entrepreneurs, exactly like the people who are listening to you now. And it's a chance to listen in and hear us. If you can't get a mentor yourself, you can at least listen in to somebody mentor someone similar to you.
I love that. Marc, we appreciate that tons. And I know Marc at Kibble.com is going to be getting a lot of mentor requests. So we'll get the autographs out there. But on the topic of Marc as an individual, as a person, and beyond just the business mind, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about your Tuesdays at 5 p.m. rule. I think something a lot of our next gen entrepreneurs, we mentioned lifestyle before, we're chasing our dreams, right? We're out here building, whether you call it your empire, your ideal life, whatever your term is, we're building greatness on our own terms. And for you, you knew that part of that was not just in the office. It was with your family, with your wife, or surfing and kayaking and doing crazy adventure sports. Talk to us about how you were able to set those boundaries, keep those boundaries, and what that means to you, enabling yourself to be your best in every single day.
This is a great question, because especially when people are deluged with what it means to be an entrepreneur, and they're seeing people pitching on Shark Tank and raising money and watching the Social Network movie, and it's all parties. You've got to have a reason of what your whole purpose in life is. And that's individual. And for me, I realized a long time ago that I was not a whole person if I was just being a business person. I mean, don't get me wrong. I love that. Hugely fulfilling for me, tremendously intellectual challenge. And I could never stop. I couldn't stop being an entrepreneur as easily as I could stop breathing, I could do it for 3 minutes or whatever it is. But for me, there was 2 other big components. And one is that I have a family. I have a wife that I've been married to for a long time. It was my best friend. I have 3 kids, and I need that to be part of my life. And I realized that I did not want to be one of those entrepreneurs who was on their 6th or 7th company, but also on their 6th or 7th wife. I wanted my kids to grow up knowing me and, best as I could tell, liking me. So I needed that to happen. And the same thing, I also knew something about myself, which is that my personal time, the thing that makes me whole, is being outside. It's doing, you call them adventure sports maybe, but it's more wilderness adventure, things like climbing, mountain biking, backcountry skiing, surfing. And unfortunately, I happen to pick something that fulfills me in that way. That's not the kind of thing you can squeeze in between an 11 o'clock call and a 1 o'clock meeting. You've got to block out enough time to leave for a minimum a day, but usually a week. So all 3 of those things needed to coexist, and that required designing a life that would do it. But that was my objective. That was the first objective, was that I had to have a life which had balance to it. And, the funny thing, when we talk about definitions of success and how people think success is the money and success is the fame and all that stuff. And for me, that never was success. Success was balance. Success was, could I find the things that I like doing and I was good at and get to do those every day? what success was being able to spend time with my family. Success was being able to get outside and surf and ride and run and bike and all those things. So, we mentioned I've launched 7 companies, and 2 of them have been multi-billion-dollar market cap companies, bunch of IPOs. But the thing I'm most proud of is doing all those things while having a chance to get out and climb and hike and surf, and while staying married to the same woman for going on 30 years, and having my kids grow up knowing me and, best as I can tell, liking me. That's success.
Amen.
Marc, we could keep going forever. There's so much. This interview has been informative. It's been inspiring, and it's been actionable for entrepreneurs to get out there. Dylan and I have already recommended the book. There's so many anecdotes we didn't get to take away. You have the podcast. Let our audience know, where can they best find you? Any specific podcast episodes that you want them to check out? How can our audience get more of Marc?
So certainly you can find the book any place you buy books. That will never work. You can find the podcast anywhere you find podcasts. Also, that will never work. Pretty catchy, huh? But basically, ground zero for all things Marc Randolph is marcrandolph.com, where you can find my writing, you can find my tweets, my Instagram. Basically, you can self-select at whatever your attention span is, and I've got something for you. So if you can blink about 12 hours, I got the book. But if you can only spare about 30 seconds, well, then go for the tweets and everything in between.
Marc, we are so grateful for you. Audience, we're going to put all of that in the show notes for this episode. Marc Randolph, author, entrepreneur, dad, husband extraordinaire. We appreciate you joining us on this episode of Momentum Audio, and we can't wait till next time in person soon. Thanks so much, Marc.
Fantastic. What a pleasure to be with you, and good luck to everyone out there with whatever you're working on.
Thank you.
Appreciate it, Marc. What an incredible guy.
Unbelievable.
What an incredible guy. So Next Gen fam, you got to know some quick background. Dylan and I are part of the book club, and we were reading, shout out Rich Keller, The Catalyst Effect, and reading
big shout out.
Marc's book, which is incredible. Marc has done some incredible interviews. His Tim Ferriss interview, I definitely recommend. But Marc he's an incredible guy. I mean, I really feel like I just want to hang out with him more. I want to become one of his mentees, no problem. It's inspiring, but he also gives you like actionable tips, and he gives you a framework to approach. Like, amazing.
And it's fun. If you watch this interview live, you're listening later, his demeanor, his awareness of who he is and where he wants to be going. He talks about it. We didn't get to ask him in the interview, but if you're lucky, the things that you're good at and the things you enjoy align. And it's so clear that Marc Randolph has found that recipe and really built it. It didn't happen by accident. He was out there trying and searching and made it happen. Tons to walk away. I know I will be, most certainly.
I mean, big takeaway for the Next Gen fam, this just gets started mentality. He's telling you, it was a thread everything. I do not care if you don't know anything about the industry. You have no money. He's saying you're not going to make it on the cheap money. You're not going to make it. Just get started. Figure out what the customer wants and just roll up your sleeves and get going. The idea is only like negative 3% of the success. Make it happen. Get in the game. So huge thank you to Mariah on Marc's team, Jenna on our squad for bringing this all together, and Marc for being just an incredible guest to work with and giving our Next Gen fam so much. So Next Gen fam, as always, want to get your feedback on what you liked, what you didn't like, but look forward to having you check this out and keep going from here.
Hit us up on socials, reach out to Marc, let us know your takeaways, what you're going to be walking away with. And until next time, Dylan, Justin, we appreciate you joining us in this live recording of Momentum Audio, and we'll catch you soon, fam. Now that's momentum.